Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1992 horror film Dust Devil. Now, I honestly don't know if I would call it a horror film. I think limiting it to only the horror genre is not really fair to this movie. This movie is a combination of a whole bunch of different genres, including horror. It's got elements of fantasy, it's got elements of a drama, it's got elements of a thriller. So saying that it's just a horror film, I think, is not really fair to the film. And also, it sets itself up for disappointment because you don't really get a lot of the things that you typically look for out of a traditional horror film. Now, before I go any further and share any more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Seth for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, Dust Devil is one of those movies that actually I did watch for the first time, uh, at least I think it was like over 10 years ago, because I picked this DVD up for super cheap at an FYE when I was living in Oklahoma City, and I knew next to nothing about this movie. I just thought it looked kind of interesting. I saw that Robert John Burke was in the cast, and I was curious to see what he would do outside of the RoboCop franchise. And it included like 3 documentaries on the set, so it was like $5.99 or something for a used copy. So I was like, sure, I'll spend $6 on this. It was a good purchase because now this set's out of print and it goes for a lot more than that. But yeah, I saw it once a long time ago. I remember not hating it, but I definitely don't remember like being a huge, enormous fan of the film. And after watching it again, I like it okay. I would say it's a time waster for me for the visuals, for the aesthetic, for the direction by Richard Stanley. Not necessarily for the plot or the wide array of performances in the cast. It's really one of those things where I like it for the visuals and for the unique look of the film, not necessarily for character depth or for the overall plot, because I think the plot is kind of muddled and kind of confusing at times. But it's one of those movies where I still really appreciate the effort that was put into it, because just like Hardware, it is a very unique kind of experience. This is much more closer to like a Western in its structure than something like Hardware. It's definitely a lot more slow paced. Um, and I think some people might find that a bit dull and boring. But one thing that definitely is not dull and boring about this film is the direction by Richard Stanley. Once again, Stanley does a spectacular job directing. It had been, I think, like a couple years since he did Hardware, because this came out in '92, and he just picked up where he left off and carried over some of the tricks that he learned while shooting Hardware and applied it to this film, and just created a really incredible looking movie. The way that he utilizes the landscape of Namibia is honestly some of the best I've ever seen when it comes to anyone working with a setting. Um, so much so that the landscape of Namibia becomes its own character because of the way that it was shot by Stanley and Steven Chivers, who was the cinematographer. And yeah, just the usual Richard Stanley uh stellar utilization of visuals and technique, a good usage of angles and zooms and pans and perspectives and um, um, establishing shots that really do create a very breathtaking uh, visual style. And when it comes to the sequences that are nightmarish or intended to be something that's very ethereal and very spooky and eerie, like the way that they're shot and lit is incredible. It is really effective stuff. And even the little bits of gore that are there, like the end of the movie has one of the best headshots that I've ever seen in any film in terms of satisfying gore and also effective, fairly realistic looking gore. When the Dust Devil gets his head blown off at the end of the movie, it's a crowd pleaser. It absolutely is, because it's a great effect and it's shot in a way that really provides the utmost impact in that sequence. And there's just a lot of other sequences in the movie that are just shot really well. Now, Dust Devil is also written by Richard Stanley, and it's a decent enough screenplay. I don't think it's bad by any means. Like there's a fair amount of creativity here. I don't think it all works, but I appreciate the effort and I appreciate the fact that it's there. Um the Dust Devil is an interesting villain. I think the fact that it's some kind of supernatural demon is actually something that works rather well in the script and throughout the story when it comes to like the mystery of the Dust Devil and its powers and how it reveals itself and how it chooses its targets, which it picks people who are vulnerable in an emotional way. So people who are suicidal, people who feel like there's nothing left in their lives, were in terms of a reason to keep living. So the Dust Devil comes in and he takes advantage of those people at their lowest point. And I thought that was actually uh, interesting. And I thought, for the most part, Stanley did a good job working with that aspect of the script. But when it comes to some of the character development with Wendy and her husband, not so much. The stuff with Zakes Mokae's character, this cop named Sergeant Ben Mukrab, I don't really feel that was really something that was that strong in terms of the characterization. The scenes with him just felt like they added not a whole lot to the movie other than just to the running time. And for a film called Dust Devil, yeah, you do get the Dust Devil. You do see a fair amount of the Dust Devil, like especially early on, but then it starts to shift into a different kind of film where it focuses on Wendy, and then it jumps from Wendy to focusing on Sergeant Ben. And I think the more effective thing is Wendy, so I really feel Wendy should have been introduced earlier instead of trying to do the stuff with the sergeant. I know why the sergeant is there because that is what enables Wendy to be able to get a hold of this magical uh, stick of some kind that enables the Dust Devil to be harmed in the climax. So without that, then the Dust Devil wouldn't be able to be destroyed. But I think there could have been a better way to kind of handle that or streamline some things. I know the film was cut to shreds by the original producers. I think it was Miramax and some other people. The original cut of the film was a butchered mess that cut a lot out of the movie, a lot of character depth, a lot of plot elements, even cut a lot of the supernatural elements out of the movie. And I haven't seen that cut, and I have no plans on ever seeing that cut because that doesn't interest me at all. This film already isn't great. You cut out the supernatural aspects, which are some of the best things about the movie, then you've got an even worse film. So I have no interest at all in seeing the butchered, truncated version of this movie. Um, but yeah, it does a good enough job keeping you at least interested when it comes to how things are going to play out. but it's not consistent. Like it'll hook you, and then it'll lose you. So you'll be like, oh, you're initially hooked, but then you don't stay hooked, because I don't think the script does as good of a job being consistent in terms of keeping you invested. So you're just kind of waiting for things to happen. You're just, in essence, kind of wandering through the desert, just kind of waiting to see if you see a mirage in the distance, and the mirage is a nice looking shot or a nice looking visual, and then you get to the ending and it's just more sand. And here's the thing, like, I actually think that was something that worked in the film's favor, because I really liked the shots of this town that was just completely enveloped by the desert, and you had all these empty buildings that were just full of sand, and I thought it created a very eerie atmosphere. And honestly, I wish that was utilized more in the film. Like maybe have that be like the main setting or something. I think that would have been interesting. I understand why not, because it'd be difficult to shoot in, but I still thought it was a really striking series of sequences. You know, this town that's just completely enveloped and just taken over by the desert. There's just sand and all of these buildings. There's a movie theater that's completely vacant and empty, and it's just full of sand and bones. And it is a rather violent film. At least the final cut, the version that I saw, there's a fair amount of blood. There is a climactic gunshot to the head, which is honestly one of the most brutal and gory headshots you will ever see in anything. It's a great looking practical effect. But even that's kind of a letdown, because, okay, you have this great demise for the Dust Devil when he gets his head blown off, and it amounts to a whole lot of nothing because the curse of the Dust Devil is just passed on to Wendy by the end of the movie. So she's the next Dust Devil to set up a sequel that never happened. So it's just one of those things that's like, okay, you're already wandering through the desert narratively for a good chunk of the movie. I remember it's kind of marketed as kind of a serial killer thing where the Dust Devil's going around killing people, but they don't really, go that far with that, other than the whole thing where he's killing these people who are down on their luck and down in the dumps or vulnerable emotionally. And that's why he turns his sights to Wendy, because she tried to kill herself. And the whole passing the curse on, it just felt like it almost felt like a cop out, or just not necessarily a cop out. It just didn't feel earned. I understand what Stanley was trying to do. It's like a legend, and the legend carries on, and so on and so forth, and it never dies. But this is such a weird film when it comes to its story and a lot of different elements of it, that there's no way that anyone would ever finance a sequel. So why have the sequel bait ending? Just kill the Dust Devil and that's it. It's over. But that's just how I feel about it. And if you did like Sergeant Ben, for instance, well, he doesn't make it. And I definitely didn't like the stuff with the husband, Mark. I don't think that was written very well at all. Because of this whole subplot about him trying to find his wife, and he goes to a bar and gets his ass kicked, and he winds up in the desert. He gets handcuffed to a car. He essentially gets left behind to die by his wife, who's now the new Dust Devil, who just ignores him. And I'm like, okay, that was pointless. We didn't need the husband character at all, if that's all that happens with this character. You have this other character named Captain Bayman, who's also in the film a little bit, but there's not much to his character either. It just seems like it's an excuse for Richard Stanley to cast William Hootkins in another film role. And there's this whole romance thing that's kind of going on between the Dust Devil and Wendy, and that hits a dead end. So it's one of those things where I really do feel that Richard Stanley's trying to do too many things at once with this screenplay. This is an example of a filmmaker who is much better off focusing on their direction, and if they are going to write the film, writing something that's very simple and straightforward, like Hardware, where it just turns into this relatively not complex story of survival. And with Dust Devil, he's trying to do all these different things about mythology from African culture and all this other stuff, and subtext and all these other and more characters, and it just it doesn't really work, at least not for me. I think it just winds up not being a satisfying whole. So there are some elements of the script that are interesting and are well done and well executed, but then there's other elements that just feel kind of half-assed and not really fully realized, and so yeah, it's just one of those things where this is an instance of a second time filmmaker and writer who, after a pretty impressive debut, puts a little too much on their plate the second time around. And that's really how I feel about Dust Devil. And the script is really one of the biggest reasons why I'm not a super big fan of the film. Like, I like it okay, mainly because of the visuals and the direction and some of the elements of the screenplay, but I definitely am not as big of a fan of it as Hardware or even Color from Outer Space. Now, the film also features a cast that is, in a lot of ways, also a mixed bag. You got this guy named John Machikska who plays the narrator, and some character named Joe. That's another thing about the movie. Like, we didn't really need a narrator. I don't think that was necessary. Robert John Burke plays the Dust Devil, and he's actually a pretty intimidating presence in this film. I would say this is the best performance from Robert John Burke. And the biggest reason for that is that he has next to no lines of dialogue. It's all his physical presence. And he is an imposing figure. He's a fairly tall guy. He's in good shape. And he's got a pretty intriguing look to him in terms of like his I don't know if he has blue eyes, but he definitely has some eyes that are definitely very piercing. And so he's someone that carries a certain weight when it comes to his presence. And I feel if you just focus on that and don't have him say that many lines of dialogue, then you can get the most out of him, because he's not really the best actor, but he's a good presence. And when it comes to the Dust Devil, that's all you really need. You just need a guy who has a good presence, who can be intimidating and creepy and kind of unnerving and disturbing without really much lines of dialogue. Terri Norton plays a character named Sark. I don't really remember the character that much at all. Yeah, the guy's house got burned down. Yeah, early in the movie. Okay. Oh yeah, it was the girl. Yeah, it was the girl that the Dust Devil kills in the beginning of the movie. Chelsea Field plays Wendy Robinson, who's essentially the lead of the movie. And I thought she did a good job. I didn't think she was great. I don't know if it was ADR or something, but I didn't think her performance was that consistently good. I thought it was kind of uneven in terms of the line delivery. Sometimes it was great, other times it was kind of flat. Maybe it might be because she was a last minute choice. Because initially, Richard Stanley, he wanted a different actress. In fact, he wanted the actress who was one of the main characters in the film Shallow Grave, which came out in 1994, I think. And that actress is Carrie Fox. He wanted her to play Wendy. But the film's financiers, the people who were financing the film and providing the money, they weren't satisfied with her. They were like, "We don't know who this is, and definitely don't think she's right." And so Stanley had a second suggestion, which was Stacey Travis, who was in Hardware, and I think she would have been great. Would have been cool to see her work with Stanley again. But the people who were funding the film, they were like, "No, no thanks." And then Chelsea Field was a last minute compromise. So maybe that's why the performance is kind of uneven, because she was a last minute compromise. But it's not like it was a bad performance. It was just in the middle for me. Rufus Swart, though, was Mark Robinson. I thought he sucked. I thought it was a really cardboard performance. William Hootkins was good in the little bit that he had as Captain Cornelius. Zakes Mokae, he was fine as Sergeant Ben. I honestly feel he was a lot better in like Surfing in the Rainbow and a lot of other films that he was in, Body Parts, versus his performance in this, which is interesting because he technically has more screen time than some of these other horror films that he did around this time. But maybe he's an actor who works better when he's not on the screen as much. Because I don't think Zakes Mokae is what I would consider to be a great actor or performer either. He's a good character actor. He's a good actor to have in small doses. I don't think he's a good enough actor to be a main character or have a lot of screen time, but that's just me personally. It doesn't help either that his character he just feels like an exposition dump half the time for the legends and the mythology of the Dust Devil and the Namibian culture, and he's the one that finds the stick that weakens the Dust Devil enough to the point where it can get shot in the head, but before that happens, he dies. So that's another thing. It's like, okay, like Zakes Mokae is in this. He has a little bit more to do, but his character still dies. So it just feels kind of like a waste. And there's a few other people, but that's really the main cast. Chelsea Field and Robert John Burke. Those are the ones that are probably the most consistent performers. Cinematography by Steven Chivers. It's really a stupendous sight. It's a great looking film. I love the way that this film is shot, with the cinematography, with the lighting, with the way that it just really brings the setting to life and gets the most out of, what was definitely another pretty low budget. It was more money than Hardware, but it still wasn't what you would consider to be like a major big budget production. The editing by Derek Trigg and Paul Carlin, I think at times the film could have been trimmed, could have been a little tighter. Not to the point where you cut out almost everything and it's like 80 something minutes, but maybe shave off like 10 minutes or something, make it like 100 minutes or 98 minutes instead of 108 or 110. The music by Simon Boswell, I like it. It definitely has a certain feel and vibe to it that definitely fits the film very well. I don't think it's as memorable as his work in Hardware, but it's still a good score. And I think Simon Boswell, after hearing his work in this and in Hardware, I think he's a very underrated composer. He does not get enough credit for what he does, because he creates some really unique scores that are very one of a kind, not your typical kind of stuff. And the film, it's not really the best when it comes to its pacing. It is a little too slow or a little sluggish. Like I said, it's kind of, the film has this sort of feel of like wandering throughout the desert, dazed and without water, and just struggling to connect yourself with reality. It's that kind of thing where it's just a very hazy, nightmarish film that sticks with you in that way. It sticks with you when it comes to its atmosphere and its mood and the visual style. And that's why I like the film. I don't love the movie. I wouldn't even say that I think it's as underrated as other people do, because I can see why a lot of people aren't into this film. But I do like the vibe that it gives off. It's one of the most effective films that I can think of off the top of my head that really captures that hazy, dreamlike vibe. It's one of those things where after it's over, it feels like it was a dream. It doesn't even feel like you watched a movie. It feels like you watched a dream. And I think that's something that can definitely be really effective and strong. I mean, like this shot right here, I thought was really something out of like a nightmare. And this is a really good set. Subversive Cinema did a really good job. I mean, you have this production diary, just some more details about the behind the scenes of the film. You got this little comic book. You got this extra booklet that talks about the documentaries. You've got the soundtrack by Simon Boswell there. You've got two different cuts of the film. You have the final cut and the work print. And then you have the two documentaries. You have Secret Glory and Voice of the Moon, and the White Darkness, which is on the same disc as Voice of the Moon. I haven't seen White Darkness or Voice of the Moon. I have seen Secret of Glory, and that was interesting. The Secret Glory, that's what it is. That was an interesting documentary. It was like one of the first times I saw anything that actually detailed the real life obsession and interest that the Nazis had into the occult. I thought because I thought that was just like fiction. I thought it was just stuff that was made up by the writers of Indiana Jones. But no, it actually has some basis in reality. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, pretty good set. I know there's a Blu-ray, but like it's out of print or it's only in Germany. And it's like expensive to import. The DVD set is out of print, but you can still get it for like 16, 20 bucks depending on where you get it from. So it's not like it's one of those things where it's like, oh my god, it's $100. It's not like Hardware, which is way more expensive, which sucks because that's a much better movie. But you know what are you gonna do? But anyway, I don't really know what else to say about Dust Devil except I'd recommend it if it intrigues you. If the trailer looks like something you might be interested in, and you really liked Richard Stanley's style and his flair for directing and Hardware, and you haven't checked this one out, then I would recommend it. If it doesn't interest you that much, then I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, because even though it's well directed and it does have some good things about it, it's not really consistent enough in terms of its quality on numerous levels to really be something that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. So yeah, it's just one of those things where you're going to get something out of it regardless, but I think a lot more people are not going to really get a ton out of this other than the aesthetics, because it's such an out there, bizarre, weird film. And there are a lot of things about it that are very untraditional and very unlike the norm. And I think that can be a little bit of a turnoff for some people, with the slow pace and the narrative that's kind of all over the place. But I can't sit here and say that I ultimately didn't like the film, at least for what it brings to the screen in terms of the visuals, and it's genuinely shocking and artistic and an amazing style. It's a really stylish film that I do like to watch just for the vibe alone. Anyway, thanks for watching my review of Dust Devil, and as always, until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.